Dear Heavenly Father, we are so grateful to again that you have found time in our lives to come together in fellowship and worship. Please open our minds, our hearts, and our souls to the message of today and how we can further the development of the culture between Africans and Americans and ourselves. We ask you to send the Holy Spirit to each one of us and go with us as we leave. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen. Dave Walter is going to introduce the speaker, but first there's a question.
I just wanted to say, don't forget Terry Hawkins. Thank you. She has done a wonderful job filling in for Joe. And she will be gone for like 7 weeks.
Yeah.
But she's done a fabulous job.
Excellent point. Thank you for reminding me. She has got us all the hardware cups so that we're not overusing plastic and paper again. And she has cleaned up a lot of processes. We now use the dishwashing machine on a daily basis at this facility where it was standing unused before. So thank you very much. She will not be around for a while. She is taking a break. So anyway, Dave, thank you. This is probably your height.
These are cheap seats in front. If it was Super Bowl, they'd be what, 5,000 a seat or something. Our speaker today is Stephen Lyons. He's on the West Goshen Historical Commission. He's an actor and a musician. He's going to tell us today about a largely forgotten African-American community that existed 2 miles up the road in Westtown Township, the Shiloh AME Church and Cemetery. It was the center of a vibrant community of free blacks. I'm not going to tell you the story because that's Stephen's job. So please welcome Stephen Lyons.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you. Thank you, David, for that introduction. And I was born and raised in this community, just down the road. I'm an actor, musician, storyteller. I was living in New York up until the pandemic and pursuing my career there. And then the first wave of COVID hit. And then my father had dementia and it was deteriorating. And my mother was dealing with the brunt of that. And I returned home to take care of Dad and Mom. And unfortunately, he died as a result of the care that he received at one of the local hospitals because they gave him dangerous antipsychotic medications as a method of trying to treat his dementia. And I just want to kind of put that out there as a PSA. If you have loved ones who are dealing with this terrible disease, that there's no regulation in regards to using these antipsychotic medications. And we had stressed a number of times that we did not want the hospital to administer these, and they went against our wishes. And in this state, the hospitals have more sway in terms of how they perceive they should administer care. So I just mentioned that as a PSA. And so it's been a very difficult 4 years for us, for my mom and I. She also had a cancer diagnosis. And she recovered, thank God, and she's doing much better now. So we're grateful for that. But it's interesting how this whole story of Shiloh came up. My profession is a storyteller, and I became acquainted with the history of Shiloh during this period where I was working in New York and then coming home to take care of Mom and then, you know, the deteriorating circumstances that we faced. But I remember very vividly looking at a T.J. Kennedy map of 1847 because I had this random curiosity about some of the stone walls that run all throughout our township. And just, how did they wind up here? Who put them there? Who were the people who lived here before us? And that led me to the TJ Kennedy map. And right away, I saw something that I'd never seen before. And it said Shiloh, AME. And I knew right away, oh, that's African Methodist Episcopal Church. That's a name of enormous history to the Black community, to American history. And so that began this question. Well, I've been living here 50 years of my life. I went through the whole school system here, born and raised, and I never knew that this place existed. And so I started attending Westtown Township's Historic Commission meetings, and was happy to become acquainted with the extraordinary work that David Walter, Stephen, Gail, and many others had been doing in regards to this enormous history, which we are attempting to learn more and more about. So my purpose today, I represent Friends of Shiloh AME Church and Cemetery. We're an advocacy group trying to promote the history, this diamond in our local history's narrative, as my friend Bertha Jackman likes to say. And so this is really a broad brushstroke of our current knowledge and how we're trying to become better acquainted with this history. And there are a lot of layers to this. There are a lot of layers. There is the painful reality that this beautiful example of spiritual, economic, and political hub that once existed here no longer stands. When you drive by the intersection of Shiloh and Little Shiloh Road, you will not see any ruins, and you will not see any headstones. They were removed in the 60s, and we are trying to piece together this history. We're trying to connect descendants, and this is the story of that journey. This is the only known photo that we have, courtesy of the Chester County the Chester County History Center. It was taken in 1939 by the Brinton family. And the church, we believe, had suffered a fire sometime in the latter part of the 19th century, but that hasn't been confirmed. And so this is the TJ Kennedy map. Right here is Little Shiloh Road. And right here is Shiloh Road. And the church was right here. And then you'll see Little Shiloh is the dividing line between Westtown Township, and then up here to the north is West Goshen Township. And so this is the center of a vibrant Black community, which thrived for roughly 100 years. The church was originally a white Methodist church, built in 1807, and then it was deeded to the Black community in 1817. To begin to understand the rich history of Shiloh, we have to understand who Reverend Richard Allen is and Reverend Absalom Jones. They were close friends and collaborators as they were dealing with the scourge of racism, of slavery in our country. And Reverend Allen he officially organizes Mother Bethel in August of 1816. That's when the formal organization of the church begins, although the AME church is established earlier in the 1780s. And Philadelphia is the epicenter for the development of this church. Um, and Shiloh was deeded to the African American community in January of 1817. And what's unique about this is that when Mother Bethel was established, it comes out of a situation that happened at St. George's Church, roughly 1789, in which the congregation Reverend Allen was asked to get up in the midst of prayer. It was a packed church, and they asked him to get up so that he and his congregation could make way for the white congregants. And he said, I will get up after I've concluded my prayers. And then they forcibly removed him, and they were relegated to the back of the church. And then at that moment, Reverend Allen said, we are leaving this church, and we are going to start our own church and our own community. And in many ways, it's the germination of the solidification of the Black church in America. In understanding the multiple layers of racism, of slavery in this country, we have to keep in mind this evil that one group views another group as somehow less. And that is part of this aspect of understanding this history and also healing. Because when we respect and understand this enormous history, the desire is to preserve it and protect it, or at least honor it in some capacity, so that we know that there were people of tremendous will and power who lived, worked in our community, and helped forge the bonds of our nation. Shiloh is very important because when the church is officially organized in Philadelphia at Mother Bethel, there's an explosion of organization of creating these churches throughout the country. And Shiloh, along with Bethel AME in Westchester, are the first two churches under the AME umbrella that are officially organized. And Shiloh in 1817, and then there are other ancillary Black churches, such as Pennsbury UAME in Pocopson, which is established in 1827. And it's important to understand this because Shiloh is in many ways a lighthouse, a beacon of hope for freedom seekers who are coming north, who are self-emancipating themselves. And one of the profound insights that we have about this church is that it was a station on the Underground Railroad. Oftentimes the narrative of the Underground Railroad and abolition is concentrated in Kennett Square, that Route 52 corridor of which Thomas Garrett Jr., famous abolitionist, directed Harriet Tubman north with directing her people into this area. But really, we have to always remember that the Underground Railroad is one part of the story of the progression towards the fullness of American freedom and liberty. And that's one component. The Underground Railroad is all throughout Chester County. And the fascinating aspect about Shiloh is that it's an example of self-emancipation. And we need more of these stories, we need more of these histories. And so I had actually been in touch with, actually I'll hold off on that story because it's connected to something later. So Shiloh was established in January of 1817, and it exists as a spiritual, educational, and political nexus for some 100 years. And if you go to news, anybody have an Ancestry account? Excellent. So you have the newspapers.com account as well, and it is just a rabbit hole of history and new information. And as everything is becoming digitized, we're starting to fill in more and more gaps. So with newspapers.com, we've discovered that this was also a political area. They had poll raisings for the politicians. I forget which one it was, but in the 1880s, there was an event by the Republican Party to, have a political rally, basically at Shiloh. And there's a couple other examples of that, thanks to the newspapers.com. And so the church and the cemetery, it's a half-acre parcel of hallowed ground that holds at least 14 United States colored troops and upwards of 140 graves. Jonathan Hott, who's also part of our group, he's a professional historian, and he's been doing tremendous work, not only documenting those buried at Shiloh and helping to fill in some of the biographical information, but also other cemeteries in the county that have been neglected or forgotten. And it's also important to understand cemeteries as a way for us to connect to history. It's more than just honoring our dead, honoring our brothers and sisters who lived and worked in this community, but also recognizing their enormous contributions. And in this period of mega churches and megalomaniacs, Shiloh to me represents that pearl of American power, which is littleness, humility, care for our brothers and sisters, progressing towards freedom. And one of the unique things about Shiloh is it's 9 miles from Progressive Friends meeting. It's 1 mile from the Westtown school. And as I mentioned earlier, Reverend Allen is this thing off here. Reverend Allen is leading the cause of freedom, spiritual identity, a religious identity. And in the antebellum era, Bethel's reach spread throughout the Republic. In 1816, Allen solidified a regional network of churches in an act that would transform Bethel into the Abbey of African Methodism. Delegates from 5 churches in Baltimore, Washington, Wilmington, Philadelphia, Salem, New Jersey, whose experiences with white Methodist parent churches were similar, agreed to ally in a new denomination, the African Methodist Episcopal Connection, with Richard Allen elected the organization's first bishop. The seed of religious independence that was sowed in 1787 and germinated in 1794 grew quickly in the first 5 years of the AME denomination's emergence, absorbing congregations in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. Evangelists with talents like Richard Allen's were tasked with organizing AME congregations in Ohio and parts of the emerging West. So Allen is a tremendous leader in terms of organizing and shepherding his people. And he's helped to really galvanize the spirit of this early AME movement. So it's important to keep in mind that this is a progression towards freedom and liberty. 1817, that's when Shiloh is established, and it thrives for some 100 years. It is important to remember this idea of connection. They refer to Shiloh and other similar Black churches as connection churches. I think that's a powerful metaphor. Are we making the connections to history, the connections to liberty, to emancipation, towards the fullness of freedom? And Reverend Jarena Lee is a revered preacher in the Black church. She's the first female African-American preacher in the country. And there's a theme of walking. They're continually walking, they're preaching into the countryside, they're going to these connection churches, lighting the flame of spiritual awakening, political awakening, and Shiloh is one of the first churches. But it's very interesting, the geographical relationship between Shiloh and the Westtown School. There are some who have said that Westtown was not connected to the Underground Railroad. I contest that viewpoint, and there are other histories in the community that say Westtown was a station on the Underground Railroad. That's a whole other history, but there are several buildings which were connected to this sort of path that went from Thornbury up through along the Chester Creek branch of the creek up by Westtown and up to Shiloh. But here is an interesting blog post that is on the National Archives. And they said, here this, Absalom Jones established the African Episcopal Church of St. Thomas in 1792 and became the first African-American ordained priest. Allen built the Mother Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church, and then they give an NAID number in 1793. And then the original church was demolished and replaced with a red brick building in 1805 and was completed in 1890. A tunnel was constructed to connect the Arch Street Friends Meeting House, and this became part of the Underground Railroad. So this is actually researched history, and these two NAID, National Archives identifier numbers, point to historic documents that testify to this. So we are seeing this connection to the AME Church and the Society of Friends. It's very important to keep that in mind because there's a robust discussion happening in terms of Quaker history and its relationship to the Black community. My feeling is that Shiloh actually represented, that complicated relationship, but there was an attempt at a beloved community here. There are accounts that the Shiloh community was harassed, newspaper accounts, but there's also compelling testimony to the fact that these neighbors were very closely associated. The Forsyth family, which is a famous Quaker family associated with the Westtown School, lived right down the road and actually employed members from Shiloh, as did the Westtown School. There are many neighbors of the Westtown community that lived and that worked at Westtown School. So there's this fascinating connection between AME church history and the Society of Friends. And again, here is a map of Westtown Township. And a lot of these names that you'll see up here, here's Shiloh, this is Little Shiloh Road, and this is Shiloh Road. And there are famous names like the Pierces. The Pierce family is closely associated with Longwood Gardens and the establishment of that special place. And then the Speakman family, there's a Speakman here, and there was also a Chalky Speakman who lived across the street. They were Quaker. There's another Pierce. And then the Boyce family, they were a African-American family. The Maldens, this is James Malden, and he is listed as one of the trustees on the Shiloh deed. And what's interesting about the Malden family is when he's associated with the deeds of 1817, 1827, and then he is also part of a group of trustees who established Pennsbury UAME in 1827. So again, we're seeing this establishment of the Black church and the Black community in our area. And Westtown School is right here. Isaac J. Winters, he is one of my favorites in this world of Shiloh. He is one of the 14 United States colored troops buried at Shiloh. And he's the church sexton for some 60 years. So it's just kind of an indication of how much he loved this church, how he took enormous pride in it. And he lives in West Goshen, and the church is here. I was able to connect with the great 4 times granddaughter of Isaac J. Winters, because we had discovered that his Civil War rifle was found in the home of John Forsyth down the street. And that research came to me thanks to Gail Gutierrez, who was on the Westtown Historic Commission. And she wrote about this history. And I was like, well, I wonder, where that rifle is. And then we did some research. I was able to get in touch with the gun collector out in Gettysburg, and we were able to connect to his descendant, and she's a doctor, Dr. Jones, Latanya Jones, out in Chicago. So they have an oral history that Isaac shepherded people in the church basement at Shiloh, and also in the home that still stands in West Goshen Township. But the Forsyths is also an important name. Truman Forsyth, all of the Forsyths had a close connection and relationship to the Black community of Shiloh. So Isaac Winters' rifle is found in Truman's home. He works as a laborer in the home on the 237 acres of Forsyth land. And Truman was also part of, associated with Westtown School. I believe he was on one of the committees there. So there's basically the story of this connection between the Forsyths and the Winters. And Truman Forsyth is actually also listed on as administrator on one of the deeds to Isaac Winters' wife, Margaret Winters, in that same area. So you have Maldens, Boyces, Winters, Johnsons, all Black families in this area. And then later on in the 1850s, the Center School, which is one of the earliest integrated schools in the county, is established. So there is this, again, connection. The Society of Friends, Westtown School, assisting the Black community in terms of work, in terms of any kind of support that they needed. And there are, questions about the full extent of the relationship with these families, which we're still looking into. And then this comes to us from Jonathan Hopp. By the time Shiloh AME was formed in early 1817, Westtown had already become a hotbed of the African-American community in this part of Chester County, bolstered not only by demand for tenant farmers, but also by surrounding industries and support staff for the Westtown School. A large number of African-Americans had settled in Westtown and nearby East and West Goshen townships. By 1820, there were at least 16 property-owning African-American families in Westtown alone, among them 2 bulwarks of the fledgling church, Jeremiah Miller and William Henry. That's from Jonathan Hopp's work, The History of Shiloh AME Church. And then under their leadership, Shiloh would become one of the leading AME churches in this area and would give rise to a small village that would at various times house 2 stores, a blacksmith shop, and another tradesman. in addition to a number of properties owned wholly by black families. And that's from the seminal work From Farmland to Suburbia, Arthur E. James and the Westtown Historic Commission, which is available for purchase on the Westtown Township website. Again, Shiloh's significance, a northern star in the midst of vast tracts of land that are predominantly owned by white Quakers in antebellum America. Shiloh represents that northern star, a safe haven just over the line. And that's why I think this history is so absolutely important, because if we don't honor it, even if the site is no longer there, even if the headstones are no longer there, it's that northern star, that spiritual energy reverberates throughout this landscape. And especially in this time, we need to be recalled. We need to recall freedom and liberty and self-determination and the refinement of the American dream. Connections to the local Quaker community, perhaps the first AME connection after Mother Bethel, that's a little bit contested, but we're looking at that history. And then 1817 is the foundation of Shiloh AME. Underground Railroad activity and self-emancipation. Right now, the Harriet Tubman Byway Committee and the Pathway to Freedom are projects that are ongoing to further understand Harriet's route, her contributions in terms of the Underground Railroad. And self-emancipation is a very important concept because while we have accounts of the Underground Railroad, they're mostly told through the rose-colored shades of Mr. Smedley and to a lesser degree William Still, because William Still was writing for a white audience. And there is a need to get these stories out, but that perspective is somewhat skewed because we didn't have the full history, and that's why Shiloh is so important. We're having, we're connecting more and more to descendants to help understand their oral history and the histories that are happening that are told by the families. These are just some fascinating, by the way, the History Center, as most of you I'm sure know, is a pearl in our community because they have a wealth of historic articles, journals, diaries. I spent a lot of time over there just going through, firsthand accounts of some of these early Quakers in regards to this history. And there were these grand meetings in the woods. So, like I said, I grew up right over the hill from Shiloh in West Goshen, just up from Forsyth's Run. And to think about that in the early 1800s, there were blacks and whites both praying under the stars in revival meetings in this land of Goshen, in this place of Shiloh. And it's sort of representative of America's contradiction. There were times where we could pray together, and yet there would be this enormous conflict and incongruity. So it's a powerful testament to the legacy of this enormous pearl of history. Reverend Jarena Lee, as I mentioned, had preached here, and she is revered in the Black community. The fact that she came to Shiloh represents enormous history, and that she had connections to the Westtown community. So that's something we'd love to learn more about. Who were her associations in Westtown Township? How can that better inform the history that we know of? Also, Reverend Henry McNeil Turner, major civil rights activist, first chaplain of the United States Colored Troops in the Civil War. He was a member of the Georgia House of Representatives and state senator. He was elected the AME bishop in 1880, and he worked for a Quaker family in South Carolina when he was growing up. So this was the rifle that I'd mentioned, Private Isaac J. Winters, Pennsylvania 43rd Company F, church sexton for 60 years. What's amazing about this rifle too is that it's now on display, or it was on display at the American Revolutionary War Museum in Philadelphia. It was originally found at the Forsyth home off of Westtown Road, part of the Fortune exhibit of the Black family, of the Black founders of the Revolutionary War Museum in Philly, connecting descendant families and deep Quaker connection to the families of Shiloh. You can even see his engraved initials, Isaac J. Winters, Company F. He was wounded at the Battle of Crater, lived in West Goshen on the Forsyth's land for some time, and then bought his own home just up the street. So just to briefly touch on this, there's a very difficult situation in our county about preservation. Why is it important that we preserve these historic sites? Because they remind us of our legacy. They remind us of our connections to our past. And the fact that John Forsyth, he was actually a Scots-Irish Presbyterian, and he comes to America in 1773, and he is persuaded by the energy and passion of Rachel Kirk's preaching, member of the Society of Friends, and he converts to Quakerism. He comes to America with 19 linen shirts, a violin, and a velvet waistcoat. Upon conversion to Quakerism, he buries the violin and the waistcoat in the backyard, giving up his worldly possessions for a life of silence and service. It's interesting because in Pennsylvania, in the 250 years history of Quakerism, which you can find, they have copies over at Birmingham Friends, it describes how John Forsyth, the Scots-Irish, ministered to the Black community and sought to their care. So there is a legacy of the Forsyth family assisting him, but he's a beloved schoolmaster at Westtown. He's tasked with starting the school. And there's a wonderful account of his history in the Helen Hole book. But he is also friends with Enoch Lewis, another famous abolitionist. And his story is somewhat muted in the pages of time, but there's a tremendous story about him. He moves into Forsyth Cottage, which John had asked the school, "You need to build me a house for my wife and children," in 1799. Enoch Lewis moves into that house in 1803. And then about, I think it was 1807, I have to get the date right on that. But there was a woman in hysterics who knocks on the door in the middle of the night. And she pleads with Enoch, help me. They have abducted my husband, who was a freeman. But again, slave catchers coming up north from Maryland, they seize this man. Enoch Lewis jumps on horseback and rides into the Justice of the Peace in Westchester, and he manumits a man who was technically free to begin with, posting his entire month's salary. And later the man goes on to pay back the manumission, and then the account is that he goes on to buy 10 to 12 acres of land, farmland, and is a beloved member of the community. So that's another fascinating aspect of history that we would love to know more about. Who was this man, and what did he go on to become in the community? And so Enoch Lewis and John Forsyth. They were colleagues at Westtown School, responsible for getting the school up on its feet. And he bought somewhere of 237 acres of land in the vicinity of Westtown, just down the road from Shiloh. And he built this house for his sons, John and James. And it had fallen into, sadly, has fallen into a terrible state right now. But last year, May 25th, we held the first decoration day for Shiloh AME Church in likely 100 years. And that was no small effort. It was a wonderful day in which we decided to, I believe it was Shirley White who came up with the idea to create cemetery headstones representing each of the 14 United States colored troops buried at Shiloh. And we cut them out, and participants held them as the Brandywine Civil War Roundtable, Civil War veterans presented the colors. And there were speakers such as Dr. Tanya James Taylor from Westchester University, Dr. Cheryl Renee Gooch, author of Hinsonville's Heroes, an excellent book about the Black community of Hinsonville, which later is Lincoln University. So it was a wonderful day honoring our veterans there. And this is the only known headstone that still exists from Shiloh. Private Alfred By, who is one of the USCTs buried at Shiloh. It's safely being protected right now. And then, again, thanks to David's efforts, in his, he's been working to advocate for this history for many years. But there's an article in the Unionville Times in which the efforts were being discussed to how do we preserve this sacred site. And I noticed that in the comments section, there was a person who had mentioned, oh, I have a relative buried there. And so I got on Facebook and I just like researched, who is this man? And it's Lonnie Nichols, and he's a descendant of Private Alfred By, and he was able to join us for remarks on the Decoration Day. So if you want to see Isaac J. Winter's rifle, it is on part of the virtual exhibit, the Black Founders exhibit at the American Revolutionary War Museum, which is online. There's a virtual exhibit. And then a little bit about him. He was the rifle, musket, bayonet, and belt plate on display, in this case, belonged to Private Isaac J. Winters of the 43rd Regiment of the United States Colored Troops. Winters, born in 1828, was from Chester County, Pennsylvania, southwest of Philadelphia. Winters trained at Camp William Penn along with Robert Bridges Fortune before marching south to Virginia. Wounded at the Battle of the Crater on July 30th, 1864, Winters survived the war. He returned to Chester County with these items as mementos of his wartime service. So just to help give you a little bit of perspective, this is one of the proposed routes of the Harriet Tubman. Actually, I think these are confirmed routes of the Harriet Tubman Byway extension into Pennsylvania, the Route 52 corridor. And it goes up along, one branch of it goes along Creek Road 52 up through Westchester. And then you'll notice here the proximity. Price Street is around this area. This is about roughly 4 miles away. It's important to note this because, 4 miles to Shiloh, because Harriet Tubman was also a member of the AME Church. So it's more than likely she knew that Shiloh was a station and a lighthouse to send freedom seekers. let me see here. This is a 1937 aerial of Shiloh, right here. And then there's this question of how do we honor sacred spaces and historic places? When I became aware of Shiloh, it caused me to become a part of West Goshen Historic Commission because we're seeing the destruction of this beautiful home here, which holds enormous value. And basically, the property owner does not maintain it. He does not protect the roof. He does not live on the property. And there's been vandalism, and this church, this house dates back to 1818. And these histories are connected. So if we lose them, we lose the footprint of legacy. So we're advocating for these spaces because it's all connected, and we're all connected, and we're trying to make the connections. While Shiloh no longer exists as a physical structure, its spiritual footprint exists and it permeates the landscape. A few success stories. Our latest initiative is to propose a historic marker to be placed in front of Shiloh AME Church and Cemetery in the right-of-way in Westtown Township. And so there is precedent to establish a historic marker in that right-of-way to see to its honor and recognition. And within the past year, 2 years, Ebenezer AME Church, another early AME church established in 1832 on Route 401 up from People's Light and Theater Company, they placed a historic marker there, and East Whiteland is currently working through proposals to fortify the structure, but it gives you an insight into what Shiloh must have looked like. My friend Bertha Jackman, she is the church historian at Mount Zion AME Church in Devon, Tredyffrin Township. She was pivotal in establishing the historic marker for the Berwyn school fight, in which there was an attempt to segregate the school system. And there was tremendous organization in the Mount Zion AME Church to organize the community to push back against this attempt at segregation. And that historic marker was established not long ago. Another wonderful success story, all these AME churches, it's wonderful. Spring Valley AME Church and Cemetery in Concord Township, also in close proximity to Concord Meeting, is also associated with renovation efforts. The township was able to actually acquire the property and refurbish the site, and it's beautiful. Andrew, the Wyeth family, is associated with it. They actually prayed and were part of that community, which is also connected to Mother Archie, which our friend Jonathan Hopp is also involved in efforts to preserve that site down the road. Jamie Wyeth was commissioned to paint the Crown of Thorns, which is based on a painting which hung in the Spring Valley AME Church. And the Wyeth family attended services at this church. Community, connection, and history, all of these things are interwoven. This is my favorite painting of Andrew Wyeth's. And it shows a humble gathering of a funeral. You can see here, this is Mother Archie down here. And these headstones. It is a powerful testament to American soul. This is actually our proposed language for a Shiloh AME Church and Cemetery marker. Shiloh African Methodist Episcopal Church and Cemetery. In 1817, Shiloh AME Church purchased this land and graveyard One of the earliest AME churches in the area, it became the site of a vibrant Black community, a refuge on the Underground Railroad, and defined the spirit of self-emancipation. Jarena Lee, the first female preacher of the AME Church, spoke here in the 1820s to 1830s. Reverend Henry McNeil Turner also spoke here, and 14 United States colored troops who fought in the Civil War are among the 140 people buried here. After the congregation dwindled and the church burned, it was demolished in 1960 with headstones removed and graves forgotten. So this is our current initiative to propose a historic marker to at least recognize the enormity of this history. And then this is just a map to help show you where we're proposing it be in the right of way on the Westtown Township side. The parcel of land is only a half-acre parcel of earth. And then a little bit further down is where Isaac Winters lived. And then this is an example of what the marker would look like, the Revolutionary War militia marker in Westtown Township. And then just in closing here, I wanted to share with you something that I found incredibly profound. And if you ever have a chance, I highly recommend taking a stop over at the Westtown School archives, because they have an amazing archives there, and they're extremely helpful and wonderful people. But this is from an edition of the 1837 Miscellany, and it gives an insight into the thinking and the intelligence of these young people. It was the first literary magazine that was published at the school. And one of the things that we don't really know is that there were a lot of famous abolitionists who came through this school. Garrett's, Mendenhalls, Sharpless, Price's, Rachel Kirk Price, who converts John Forsyth to Quakerism. She, along with her husband Philip, are the first superintendents at Westtown School, major activists in the anti-slavery movement. And so this comes from one of the students in March 3rd, 1837, volume 1. And he says here, in this country where they are chained together by the hundreds, driven along the streets like cattle, and they're only regarded as property, education entirely withheld from them. No wonder they are regarded as an inferior race. But who reduced them to this degraded condition? Many of them are the professing Christians of America, this land of Bibles and the churches, of temperance societies and Sabbath schools, slavery as tolerated, and 2.5 million are groaning in Egyptian bondage. Could everyone be made fully acquainted with their sufferings? Could they but witness the anguish of spirit, the agonizing groan, the separation from all that is dear to his heart, husbands torn from their wives, children from their parents, and dragged into perpetual bondage, never to meet again beneath the sun? Would not the voice of every Christian philanthropist from Maine to Louisiana, from the Gulf of Mexico to the lakes of the North, be heard in one united voice for the immediate manumission of the poor degraded African? Oh, happy day when the echo of their voices shall be heard from hill to hill and from mountain to mountain brook, claiming liberty throughout the land. Signed, a person whose pseudonym was Olmus. I'm grateful to the Westtown School for being able to discover that history and for it to be shared with us here. I would just like to share with you one last thing. When I was living in Harlem, processing this dichotomy of this history emerging and wanting to do something about it, this song came up out of nowhere. And it's about two people. It's actually a duet. And he is a farmer, Scots-Irish farmer. And she is a woman, a freedom seeker of enormous power and strength, coming to claim her promised land. And this is a song I wrote about that, and it's called Shiloh. What are we waiting for? Uncover these silent stairs, unburden these wounds and chains. Whatever you're running from, I'll be your bond and balm. There's a little church on a hill. There's a little time left still. It's no small miracle upon Shiloh, and we can't build a mountain of steel and stone carved from the ashes of our worn bones. Whatever the price we've paid, wherever these scars are from, my heart is your ransom. For whatever we've left behind, there's nothing but stars and pines. Northern star for a miracle upon Shiloh Hill, 'cause we can't build a mountain of steel and stone carved from the ashes of our worn bones. These cold brave stars that shine on heroes' bones. We've gone 1,000 miles to make this world
Thank you.
Anybody has any questions? I know it went over a little. Yes, sir.
You know the reason why it was torn down and the gravestones removed in 1916?
So the question was, do we know why the church was demolished and the headstones removed? There is an understanding that the church itself had become a place where vandals would break in, and there could have been some liabilities, because children were playing in the church and so forth. And it's also, I believe the property owner wanted to establish an orchard there. So, but you raise an important point about the disenfranchisement of land and trying to move in a direction of healing that and understanding that. So anything that can be done in terms of rectifying that, I think as a community, we need to work towards. Yes, sir, in the back. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
Stephen, does the proximity of Cheney University fit into your storytelling at all?
Oh, yeah.
About Shiloh?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
It's enormous, and it's kind of daunting because at least what I'm seeing is that there are threads of history that have been forgotten to the weeds of time. And so Cheney was an epicenter, as we know. Bayard Rustin taught there and went to school there, and he lived in the Glen Mills area. Glen Mills also a vibrant Black community. The Cheney family were also closely associated with that history. There's a house called the Armstrong House, and that was actually believed to have had, they did an excavation. There's a new church down that way off of Westtown Road by Cheney. And when they were developing that property, they were putting in a parking lot, and there actually was an underground chamber that they had discovered that they do believe was connected to Underground Railroad activity. And yeah. So there's a lot to be discovered.
Thank you, Stephen. As you heard, the Friends Group has a number of projects going forward associated with Shiloh. The most immediate is the marker. A month ago, Friends appeared before the Westtown supervisors and asked their permission to erect this marker. And the supervisors have taken it under advisement. They have a number of concerns, one of which is the property owner of this parcel doesn't want any markers there. But the supervisors have the power to put the marker there whether he likes it or not. If this marker is approved, the Friends will have to raise about $4,000 to buy this marker. And what I'd like to propose is that this fellowship group here be the first group to pledge money. And I'm asking that the fellowship pledge now, if the marker is approved, to donate $100 towards this marker being installed. I don't know if I need a motion, show of hands or whatever. Where's Dave? Dave Goodale. Raise your hand if you think this group should pledge at least $100 to this marker. Okay, great. So Stephen, you have your first pledge of $100. Next week, I'm the speaker, and I'm going to be talking about Frederick Douglass, who was the premier Black abolitionist speaker of the 19th century. So I hope you'll all want to come and see my presentation. Yes, Steffi?
I have two questions. First of all, where did the headstones go? I mean, these were.
As I understand it, most of the headstones were wooden. The Black community couldn't afford a lot of marble or granite markers. The Alfred By one was rescued by a neighbor. There was another one in 1962 was found laying up by Route 202. The West Goshen police picked up that marker and it's disappeared. There's other stories that some were used to build a patio across the street from the cemetery and used as steps to barns and things like that. We have not discovered where any of these other headstones are. There's some may be buried in the ground. And if access is ever given to this property, they may be found.
There's number two question. What is the objection to the marker? Why? What?
We don't know the owner's objection. Every time he's been contacted by various groups, including the county commissioners, he's just refused to answer. So we think he's holding it out to develop some of the 8 acres that are contiguous, but we don't know, and we really can't speculate on why he's doing this. But he's been adamant that no recognition be made of this property.
Can he build on that property?
No, he can't. The 1993 Historic Cemetery Act in Pennsylvania, you're not allowed to develop historic cemeteries unless you remove all the bodies and put them in another cemetery. And that would cost $500,000 to move 150 bodies. So that half acre is basically worthless in terms of developing. But it may be valuable in terms of open space if he develops around the surrounding areas. You can tell I'm a little involved in this too.
I don't know if anyone would know the answer to this, but what happened to the Black communities that lived in that area?
I believe it dwindled away, and many of them moved to the AME churches in Westchester. By the 1920s, it had basically disappeared, and then the farmer who owned the land next door just basically took the property over. And in 1977, his widow sold it to the present owner for $1,000. And we have the deed, and it says right in the deed, this is owned by the Shiloh Meeting House. So it's not like he didn't know the historic nature of it.
There's also some speculation. Recently a descendant got in touch with us, and she lives in Wilmington. And preliminarily, she said that some of the families had gone to Wilmington. So it seems like either Wilmington or Westchester at this point. But it's crucial that we try to connect to the descendant community. And I think because of the complicated history of Shiloh, not many are aware of its existence. And so it's really necessary that we try and reach out as much as possible and try and connect to descendants.
Yeah, if any of you are Westtown residents, it would help if you sent an email to the Board of Supervisors urging them to approve this marker, because I think the more community sentiment there is, the less power this absentee landowner will have to sway their opinion. Any other questions? Great, well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Christine?